Alright, we got 5 movies this week, so we're probably better off just going right into them. Obviously, we're going to start with Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald, which actually has a decent start with this whole idea of Grindelwald having this nice, big sort of escape sequence as he's being moved around with his imprisonment. But the thing here is that while it is very, there is a certain excitement to it. It is sort of. I was a little surprised to hear on the way out that a lot of people thought that was like one of their favorite sequences in the movie. Because while I do think it's a really great start, it does sort of fall into it's a little hard to do just as well the fact that there's the excitement of it being in a storm, but at the same time the fact that it's in a storm kind of makes it like really dark and foggy. So you can't always tell who's being hit by what or who is where exactly. But for the most part, it is like there's just enough of a franticness to where it doesn't feel like too much overkill, and it does, work up excitement without feeling like it's overblown a bit, or a bit too, chopped up or whatever. And so it is promising enough, but the trouble with using the word promising is that these are promises the rest of the movie may not want to live up to. Um, because the first thing to note would be Depp's performance as Grindelwald, because I know that when he was the news of his casting shortly before the first Fantastic Beasts came out, a lot of people didn't really they didn't take to it. They weren't that excited about it. I know the popular opinion was they kind of wished, after having seen the first Fantastic Beasts, that Colin Farrell was like always playing Grindelwald instead of just the disguise or whatever. It was less like this would have been before like the drama with Amber Heard and all that really turned people against him. But I think also at the time people just sort of thought he was a boring choice, and they sort of expected something akin to like like his Mad Hatter performances and stuff like that, and it was easy to see why people were very dismissive, and it's like, oh, could you have gone with anybody else? But surprisingly, in this particular movie, there is something about him where he doesn't go. I would say he doesn't go over the top, and that's a good thing. But like, Depp has just this thing now where he just sleepwalks through everything. That seeing over the top Depp would almost be like, feel new and different again. But no, that's it. The thing that's good about him going against that is the fact that he's able to make this character like quietly menacing. Like there's something like weirdly soothing about his charisma here, to where he doesn't completely go off, but at the same time he's definitely not sleepwalking through it. There's definitely conscious decisions as an actor being made here, and it does make for a very interesting performance. A performance that I really wish was in the movie a lot more than it was. For being called The Crimes of Grindelwald, there's like an alarming lack of crimes and Grindelwald, but still, it's and he's sort of gives off this perfect performance of somebody you would see as like a cult leader, really. That sort of, like I said, that charisma that's downplayed enough to where it sort of pulls you in, without being too blatant about it, and that's how he gets you more or less. So that I had no problems with at all, and I really would have loved to have had more of it. So, well, the fact that this is obviously going to continue as a series, hopefully we do, because obviously this is eventually supposed to lead to, what is it, the biggest battle in wizard history between him and Dumbledore, or whatever it is, whenever that is. But in the meantime, we do have our Eddie Redmayne is still our lead. I'm really interested to see where it goes when I think J.K. Rowling was talking about the fact that not only is this supposed to be like a 5-movie franchise or something, but the fact that it's going to branch out so much that apparently Newt isn't always going to be our main character, or there might be like stories that he's actually like not in this new series. And they do open up, a lot for that. Like, it's very easy to see but it's also kind of aggravating as well. It explains a lot, but it also makes it more aggravating, because we're going to have, like, a whole new franchise here that she's mapped out. But the trouble is it's like, whatever stories are going to branch out in this new series, it's like she's trying to compact all at once into this one movie, or at least their starting points, when it's like you would think if they already know they're going to be making a whole new franchise that they would have had it mapped out to space out a little more, because they're going to have plenty of room to work with. Like, if this is as packed as, like, all these are going to be, and this is how much she wants to put in, you can tell that she's a novelist first and a screenwriter second, with how much information she tries to put in here and all the different characters that a lot of the times feel a bit like dead ends, or like they're supposed to be going farther than they are, but it's all kind of a build up for what's either going to be important later or not at all. And the fact that you can't always tell is kind of a big problem. Because and that's the thing too, is it does just feel like a lot of it is like it's sort of just a jumping off point. Like there's really no, like it's only when it's like in its very last moments do you realize that the climax is the climax, because the movie's got to stop somehow. Felt kind of a lot like it was similar to the ending of like The Desolation of Smaug and stuff like that, whereas you realize that pretty much when it's too late. Oh yeah, this is the end. I wish I had known to prep for it, but the movie's over now. Yeah, there's obviously going to be a lot of problems here, and a point I was going to make that I veered off of was Eddie Redmayne as our hero. I think I didn't have any problems with Newt in the first movie, but it is sort of a weird thing where it's like Redmayne took the mannerisms that Newt had in the first movie, like how sometimes he's a bit mumbly or he's a bit awkward or whatever, but it's like he's like totally amped it up like 10 times over, because this almost, like, it goes from Newt just being a bit awkward and frantic to almost like he can barely function in society. At least that's the vibe I was getting from him. Like, he's just so more internalized than he seemed to be before, which is weird. There's a lot of character inconsistencies throughout, come to think of it, but that one's kind of the first one to start off with. Talking about the characters like that, because obviously we've got what kind of somewhat started just a tiny bit of a love story with him and Tana, the Catherine Waterston character, but they did set up briefly that the strange character that Zoe Kravitz plays, he had like the picture of her and he brought her up once or twice. So this one goes into like full-on love triangle now that we've introduced that character, but the thing here is there's not a whole lot, and I think it's less that the characters just didn't get enough to really invest in that sort of thing. Not to mention, it's just the sort of thing that we don't really need another love triangle. I just referenced the fucking Hobbit that did the same shit. But the thing here is, it's not necessarily just that I don't think they're fleshed out enough to make that worth it. But that the movie almost 2.5 hours, the movie's so packed that it feels like it doesn't have time for this. Because there's so many other things, especially when you've got another love story going on, which is actually kind of nice. The Jacob and Queenie love story that kind of started off in the first movie, and then we had that really nice last scene between them. That was the last scene of the first movie. But when they do bring it into this, like immediately with the whole him being enchanted thing, just sort of makes the whole thing feel off from the get-go, like makes her seem a bit more off than she probably should. And then by the time we get to the end, it's like it really only served to make a certain turn in the story like more impactful. When I feel like there's probably so many other ways they could have done that, and other ways they could have strengthened her character to do this, to make that more of a tragic is a strong word, but you get what I mean. Especially since you've probably seen it at this point, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it just feels like there's so many other ways to get that effect than just going straight for it. We'll just make it a love story. Like I said, even if it works to an extent, the directions that they want to take it it's falling apart very, very quickly. But we do have, like, some effective scenes between these characters individually, like the way we look at how Queenie can read minds, so then we see her, like, in the middle of the crowd, and she gets overwhelmed because all the voices are going on at once. It's a scene, straight out of Bruce Almighty, of all things, but still, for this character, it makes sense, and it's sort of, we definitely, sympathize for her in moments like this. which make it all the more weird when this character just goes in the directions that she does. But yeah, so it's hard to tell how exactly we're supposed to feel about it. Not sure Roland completely thought that through. It was just more so, oh, here's a turn that'll, get people to react. Doesn't really matter if it's, like if it's effective in its own right, rather than just because that happens. But whatever. And they do sort of try to bring a certain magic back to it, but of course, instead of creating its own magic, it's got to go back. Which, in a sense, shouldn't feel like... It doesn't feel entirely blatant, because obviously we're in this world. I mean, it's not like they said, oh, we'll bring Hogwarts into it strictly so, we can have some sort of nostalgia feel. Obviously it makes sense, because it's the world, but still, there is just something about it to where it feels very much like they kind of knew this was the best they could do in order to get the magic back from the initial Potter series, was to just go back to the exact places, have the same... The music's always been there, but add that to seeing Hogwarts and Jude Law as Dumbledore now and all that. And sometimes they use this quite well. Like, it really does lay out Hogwarts as, like, this familiar place. Like, the moment when Lestrange is running away during the flashback, and there's that really great shot where she's, like, walking around the building and, like, the Quidditch players fly by and all that, and it's like, it just sort of encompasses the whole thing in one shot here, which is really nice. But there's only so much of that, and some of it feels a bit... and seeing, Dumbledore with a mirror and all that stuff, all that familiar territory coming back and whatever, but, yeah, like I said, it only lasts so long, so that feeling only lasts so long as well, so, yeah. As far as Jude Law as Dumbledore goes, much like Depp, needs a lot more screen time. It was actually, it kind of really bummed me out just how little the best aspects of this movie are in the movie itself. And the great thing that Jude Law does here is there's a certain, like, obviously Dumbledore's tone is already all over the place, given Richard Harris's portrayal and then the very different thing Michael Gambon wanted to do. And so with Richard Harris you had that warmth, and with Gambon you had that almost aggressiveness. And it's... Law's portrayal isn't really either one of those things, so it's almost like it's kind of right in the middle. Which, regardless, you wouldn't really expect him to be one or the other anyway, because he's playing such a younger version of it. Obviously, the character will have to have changed by the time he gets to when we know him in the original Potter movies, but... so still, what he does here, I think, pretty much is... It'd be much easier for me to go crazy about, probably, if we had more to look at, but... As is, I do think he's, perfectly fine, and a really good casting choice, too. He seemed a bit, like, he wasn't one of the first people I thought of, but then once it sort of started to settle in and some of those pictures came out, it was like, okay, yeah, this is fitting together and making sense, so we do have that. Now, I was talking about some of those shots. As far as, like, the look of it goes, I mean, it's fine. I do think, Yates doesn't nearly have, the flair of, like... He doesn't have, like, the wonderment that Chris Columbus has, or the sort of bizarre but amazing details that Cuarón had for Prisoner of Azkaban. And so, even what Mike Newell did with Goblet of Fire, Yates just sort of, like... It's almost like he's Warner Brothers' safe choice. And it's like, well, we might as well. I mean, he did all the others, so we'll give him the Fantastic Beasts series, too. It does... I do kind of like the idea of them branching off into other directors to get sort of a different feel, but so now it just sort of all feels like it's, and he's, every now and then you can sense he's trying, but sometimes it doesn't really pay off. Like, there's certain, to get all technical on you, there's, the framing sometimes is a bit off, almost like he took cues from Tom Hooper or something, and there's one point when, the really nice scene in, like, the fog, when he first meets Dumbledore, and it gives it, like, that really nice, old feel. It's like the camera just sort of wanders off by itself in mid-scene for no reason. And I feel like there were at least a couple of times where that happened, where it was like, he's almost trying... It's almost like he's listened to the criticism and he's trying to find his own flair, but it's just not there. And on top of that, not just him only vaguely having a grip on the visuals. It's kind of also his job to keep this story under control, and he's not really doing anything to help this script that had so much stuff in it, and he's not helping to like cut it down or anything because we've got. I mean, on top of all that other stuff, we've still got the Credence thing going on, which really just feels like a redundant continuation of his storyline in the first movie, where obviously now that Grindelwald knows that it's him, because in the first movie he didn't, so he was like looking for that and he was going to weaponize it and all that, but it's like it's the exact same thing he's doing. It's just now he knows it's Credence, but there's hardly a change in how this unfolds. So that just sort of felt like adding something else that, and that's just one part of Credence's story. Credence has multiple things going on here because he's also trying to like learn his origin story at the same time, and it's like, good God, how many things can you possibly put in this? You could really, really break this stuff up really easily, especially since you already know you're doing a bunch of other movies. So I don't know what was going on here. And as far as, like, it's still called Fantastic Beasts, but it might as well be Fantastic Beast. I mean, yeah, they're still kind of here, but they really only focus on that one big one. And the most creative we really get, apart from the ones we've already met, are cats with glowing eyes, or whatever they were called. He specifically said they weren't cats, but those. And it's like, that's the most our creativity's going towards now, I guess, after the other beasts were already established. So yeah, the point I'm obviously trying to make is this is just all over the damn place, and kind of disappointing in that regard, because you can really see these stories, like, expanding on their own in, other movies, and the fact that I just don't get it. In regards to trying to do all this at once, I don't know. It really makes me fear just how much story she has for the other movies, and if all of them are going to seem this packed. God help this series. So we'll see what happens, and obviously, I don't think I even need to mention that that ending is. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I heard a theory because I immediately started looking up what people were saying about it as soon as I got back, because I saw it last night. And some people are saying that maybe, without saying too much, Grindelwald's deceptive nature may have something to do with why the ending feels so, where the fuck did that come from and how? So I guess we'll just see what happens, or maybe she doesn't have an idea of what she's doing, and she's just gonna take whatever the reaction is to this one and then go on that. I really don't know. It wouldn't surprise me either way, so. But if she does have a plan, I really hope it evens itself out before we get to the end of a third movie. So, yeah, this is what we have in the meantime, so it's what it is for now. So we'll go on to Widows. A movie that was sort of interesting right away because of the fact that it's Steve McQueen. Because you see like a long, nice star-studded cast, and you hear heist movie, and you pretty much get an image in your head of what that's going to be. Until you see Steve McQueen's name attached to it. Even as generic a writer as like Gillian Flynn her name is on the script, but even so, you just know there's going to be something a little bit different when you see Steve McQueen's name on it, because he does have. I mean, I almost want to say it's a departure, but there is something here where there's like his other movies have sort of had like been about varying degrees of suffering. Like with Hunger, it was the starvation and the imprisonment and all that, and Shame, it was the sex addiction, and 12 Years a Slave, I think that speaks for itself. And then here, there is, a sort of similar, not similar, but like the theme of suffering kind of continues when you talk about like the people that are on the wrong side of the system, where you've got the politicians and the rich people and all that stuff, and then the people that suffer so those people can be rich and in control and all that stuff. But it does still feel like something that, like, he's going in a totally different direction. And also, another reason I sort of struggle to call it a departure is that when you look at Hunger, Shame, 12 Years a Slave in this, those are all kind of going in different directions, in like subject matter and other ways, and really their execution also. There's like one moment where Cynthia Erivo is running to meet Michelle Rodriguez in this, and it very much resembles the running scene in Shame, the really long shot. And apart from that, like, I would probably never have guessed who'd made this. I don't even know if I would have made that connections if I didn't already know. So, and what's really interesting about this setup is it does a number of things at once. Like, Fantastic Beasts should really take notes, because what we have here is we've got a lot of introduction to do. If you've seen that cast list, most of them are introduced in the first 5 minutes. But the way they do this is we establish the marriage between Viola Davis and Liam Neeson. We see one of their jobs, their heist, that's going horribly wrong, and there's like a chase that's shot from inside the van that they're in as shit just goes completely wrong. And then all those guys has a wife that obviously eventually is going to come into it later with Michelle Rodriguez, Elizabeth Debicki, Carrie Coon, and them. So, all of them. And all of this, like, most of the characters in this movie are introduced through that, and the editing is so well done and cutting back and forth between their married life with this job. We've met and been introduced and understand the direction most of them are coming from. Most of the, like, 10 of the characters in this movie before we even realize it. Like, it just gets there that quickly, and it's like maybe the first 5 minutes or so, and we suddenly know, like, 8 characters or 10 characters or however many. And that in itself, like, is this amazing introduction. And then, once it goes off there, it does have, like, these certain ways that sort of... It deals with a lot of different things, but at the start, most importantly, is grief. But they're able to, because you would think maybe the heist aspect, especially being introduced this early, would be like a strange contrast for that kind of thing. But there's this really interesting cut that kind of just shows McQueen's entire approach to this material, just with one cut. Of, in the, obviously the plot is that they're killed, so this isn't like a spoilery thing, but Liam Neeson and all the dudes, we see their van explode. Like, very, very much explode. Like, Michael Bay may be proud of this scene. And then it immediately cuts from that Liam Neeson and his crew exploding to Viola Davis caressing the pillow in their bed that he is no longer using. And it's like, it would seem like it's really jarring, but it just sort of perfectly shows where exactly she is, and this whole... showing how one thing led to another, and this grief is brought on by this really visceral opening scene. To where there's really, weirdly enough, as much as this movie's tackling, because it's got a lot of politics in it, it tackles race quite a bit, and it's a class sort of thing also, where we see the lower class and the higher class and how they sort of clash. There's one amazing shot that shows that in one take, with Colin Farrell driving home. But there's never really a tonal problem. Like, I almost kind of kept anticipating a tonal problem as the movie kept going, and it's really not there. Like, it's all really cohesively put together, despite how many things it wants to cover. And I was talking about, also the portrayal of grief, obviously. There's been a lot of praise thrown Viola Davis's way, and it's easy to see why, because it's... a lot of that also, not just in the way it's edited or the way McQueen tells it, but also her personal depiction of it, where because obviously there's going to be a lot of layers to this. Like, there's different, not just how she approaches this character and what all she's going into, but the grief itself has multiple layers, because this isn't her first tragedy. And once we see she's sort of crumbling inside, but because of the perfectly cast Viola Davis, who has that very sort of strong exterior, but can also show those really vulnerable sides, sometimes simultaneously, really works well. And like I said, a lot of it has to do also with just how well shot it is, because I was talking about obviously, I've been bashing long takes quite a bit lately, but every now and then there's one that sort of works, and all of them really work here, because like as I was saying before, like with Outlaw King, for instance, these are definitely more fluid, but they're not really drawing attention to themselves. And they're one of those ones where it's like, if you're really paying attention, it may not even be till like halfway through the scene you even realize it's been a long take. But sometimes there's the scenes like Colin Farrell in the car where the camera's on the outside of his car and it's his entire drive home from this place he's been campaigning, and it sort of shows you the difference in the neighborhoods as he gets to his sort of richer part of town. And it's like a really long scene, and it's only like, as I said, as it keeps on going, you finally realize what exactly it's doing and what it is that it's showing. Um, but then you also get stuff like the basketball court scene with Daniel Kaluuya. When this was one where it was like, it wasn't until halfway through the scene I realized, oh yeah, we're not cutting. It just keeps moving and circling them. But the thing also is that it's what movies that use a lot of long takes. Also, their problem is that they over they're over elaborate with the staging, and that's what really tends to draw attention to it. But this is just sort of so smooth and capturing so much and so little at the same time that it just really works in that way and doesn't feel like it's attempting to be, too stylish. If anything, it's really going against them, because obviously if there's one thing heist movies are known for, it's how, you know, obviously slick and stylish they are, and this it almost seems like it's intentionally going as far away from that as possible. But also sort of having those flares in there, because obviously the long takes, like I was talking about the running scene in Shame, or like the hanging scene in 12 Years a Slave, it's like it tends to be a trademark of McQueen's, and he's always used it to great effect, so that should have been expected anyway. And then, as I said, you got this whole list of side characters. The one that seems to be getting the most attention is Daniel Kaluuya, Brian Tyree Henry, who is Paperboy in Atlanta, and he is the politician that's up against Colin Farrell, and Daniel Kaluuya is his brother slash enforcer, who's going to do all of the violent, dirty work and all that. And the thing about this is that when we first see him, they're meeting Colin Farrell and his wife, and if you watch Kaluuya in this scene, he never takes his eyes off of Colin Farrell's wife, like, even once. Like, even when she's out of the room, like, his eyes stay in the place that she was at before she stood up. And the thing about it is, it sort of just seems like maybe he's, like, a sleazy character or something, because you see him, like, check her out. But then throughout the scene, when they're sitting across from each other, he's just got such this inherently predatory way about him that's, like, really unsettling, the way he's just constantly just keeps that vacant stare, to where it doesn't look like there's something intimidating about it, but you're not like, yeah, I had what I was saying there, and then I just lost it. I remember the stare, and I got lost in it. But that's what it is. But it's not like immediately threatening, I think is what I was trying to get to. But there's something totally off about him. Especially since he's, like, the shortest in his entourage. But there's still just such a command that he has, to where even though you see all these tall dudes walk in, like, immediately who you're supposed to be scared of, the way he just the way he approaches any scene. And no matter who it is that he's approaching. There's even also, like, the bowling alley scene, where I'm gonna guess it's not a coincidence, because he was sort of... Characters like this tend to immediately remind me of the 1947 movie Kiss of Death, where Richard Widmark played a character like this, and there was a very famous scene where he tosses somebody in a wheelchair down a flight of stairs, which in 1947 made everybody's heads explode. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he is torturing Kevin J. O'Connor in this scene, who is in a wheelchair, and it kind of gives me that very similar vibe also. Widmark was also nominated for an Oscar for that part, so I don't know if that's an omen for Kaluuya or not, but that remains to be seen. And so, yeah, and that's the thing, too, is you talk about, like, the bowling alley scene, or the scene with Garrett Dillahunt, or the basketball scene, and the thing that Kaluuya does here that you really is a testament to his performance is, like, you don't really need context for his scenes for them to work. You could see his scenes just by themselves, and they would pretty much have the same effect that they do within the movie. And I think that's definitely says something about the character and his performance and all that, and just how effective and scary he can be and all that. So yeah, that is definitely a big portion of it. And he's another one of those ones where you may almost forget how little he's in the movie. Because he's been so built up to me before I saw it, I could tell how little he was in it. But I feel like if I hadn't, had any build up to how amazing his character was in this, I probably would have never noticed and would have kept thinking he was in it much more than he actually was. But that's not to take away from Brian Tyree Henry's performance also, because he's got like obviously he's like, the head of this, like Glee is just on the side here to him. And he doesn't just sit back either and let Glee do everything. There's one really great scene where he visits Viola Davis and he has to do the really intimidating, telling her what's what thing. And he's somehow able to use one hand to like aggressively shove her and make his point, while the other hand is like very tenderly holding a dog. A dog that has probably just as much screen time as any other character in this movie. And he's also like I said, he may not be as like openly threatening as Glee, which may say a lot more about his performance, that he has to do it from seemingly like just playing another politician, but there's still something kind of equally threatening about him and equally imposing. So I think that works really well. But then you also have it's hard to find a character in this movie that's not a total piece of shit, because the next person that comes to mind is Jackie Weaver, who's playing the mother of Elizabeth Debicki, which really says something about Elizabeth Debicki, by the way, who I should probably praise real quick, because obviously Viola Davis is like, sort of our center of this, but we've got all these other characters in it. Debicki's character pretty easily gets like the biggest arc. Like she's the character, if any, that's one character at the beginning, then an entirely different one at the end, and we can sort of see kind of from the get-go how that's going to play out. But I think the most effective thing is the fact that we hope that's what's going to happen. It doesn't matter if we can predict it's going to happen. Just the fact that it does and how it plays out is the satisfying thing about it, because she's this character that's just constantly walked all over, sometimes literally. She's her husband is John Bernthal, and her first scene they're just sitting there and she's got a black eye, and we immediately know where it came from. And there's something about John Bernthal playing these characters that have like one or two scenes, and he can just make you hate him, like just immediately in that little sort of amount of screen time. But that's not where the abuse stops with her, because Jackie Weaver, her mom, there's one particular scene where she's basically trying to talk her into being an escort to pay her bills. And when she talks back to her, Weaver slaps her in the face. And you think, oh, sweet little Jackie Weaver, maybe that wouldn't mean much. Unless you think immediately of Animal Kingdom, that's that's another thing entirely. But for the most part, it's just, she just slaps her in the head. But then she says something else, and she just kind of turns this way to, like, look Debicki in the face when she talks to her. I swear to Christ... When Jackie Weaver turned, I flinched after she slapped her the first time. She didn't do it again, but I was expecting it that whole scene, and it actually physically made me react when she just turned her body a little bit. So I think that says something about her very little screen time, because after that, she doesn't really get much other screen time. That doesn't really go much anywhere else, but other than for Debicki to have another thing to get past inadvertently or otherwise. And then, if I went through the rest of the cast, we'd be here all day. But the thing here also is that there's also some techniques that might seem like maybe they're not the best, but the way the movie approaches them, like the use of flashbacks to show Viola Davis and Liam Neeson's life together that led up to this point. And it's like, in any other movie, flashbacks might seem a bit like maybe they're, taking away from the story itself, or maybe adding on more than it really needs to. But the great thing about these flashbacks that helps them really kind of... Because it is hard to do flashbacks without it seeming like you're just sort of packing in information in an easy way. We're eased into them. Because at first it starts off with, like, her just she's either thinking back, or she's just imagining that he's still there. There's a really great scene when she's like, it's her reflection in the window, and then she sees him like come up behind her and all that, and it's like this really tender moment. And then that kind of eases us into the flashback scenes where we go from her just sort of imagining he's still there to the times that he was there, and it makes the flashbacks feel much more. I keep forgetting the damn word. It flows much nicer into this, so that wasn't really a problem. And so, like I said, obviously the main thing here also is that it's not necessarily just a heist movie. If anything, the heist aspect may be the weakest part of the movie itself. Like, it's actually it seems almost too simple for how much buildup there is to it and how much time it takes to get there. But even so, and I know sometimes I get mad at movies for overcomplicating themselves, and then in this particular case I kind of turn it the same way only because it's maybe a bit too simple about it. But even so, that's really, considering how much else they're putting into this cohesively, I think kind of helps balance that out anyway. Because, like I said, you've got the whole politics thing, you've got the classes thing, you've got a little bit of the race thing. But the thing about it, though, is that when I say that, you probably think maybe... There's a particular thing you might think of when a movie talks about, like, politics and the classes and all that. How, number one, it might be saying something that's already been said a billion times, but also, secondly, the way it approaches that and how it might be a bit preachy about it. It's not at all. Because, like, there's one line when Elizabeth Debicki is talking to Lucas Haas, and they're talking about how she says basically everything is like a transaction, and he basically says, well, that's the way of the world, and, I learned that early, so that's just how I see it, that's just the way it is, and you can't really do anything about that. And that pretty much, just with lines like that, like, they may seem like they're spelling it out a little bit, but they don't really go beyond that, in regards to getting at what they're trying to say, but you can see it in so many other ways throughout the movie. Like I said, the scene where Farrell drives home, where they just show it visually without hardly even... Like I said, it's to the point to where it's subtle enough to where you really have to be watching the scene to see what it is they're showing you. So, and when you tackle material like that, that's a really hard thing to not, like, just go balls first into it and just scream at the top of your lungs what your point is. So that was... The McQueen was able to pull off talking about all of these different topics without, barely raising the voice of the script, is kind of amazing. So... Yeah, but there are some things that I think sort of makes it not as great as it maybe could be. I guess some of the things I already mentioned here and there, but also just sort of in general, the ending is a bit... Some of it is satisfying, some of it isn't, and it feels like they just sort of left a lot of things, like, unacknowledged or untouched, that probably should have a bit more closure. That sort of leaves you, after all this, sort of leaves you on a... Like, you walk out of the theater just sort of thinking, oh, what about this thing, or what about this thing, as opposed to the real strong impact of the movie itself. But overall, though, it is very well done, and it does, like... I mean, I say that now about the heist being too simple, but in time, I can probably see myself sort of appreciating that more and more, how it's sort of not, too big or overblown or anything like that. So... Yeah, that's how I feel about that, at least for now. I feel like this is a movie that'll change a lot. The more you can see it, the more appreciation you'll find for it. So I'm interested to see how I feel about it once I see it again, because I'm sure I will. So let's go on to the third movie, which is The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Something I've been excited for quite some time, because it's two of my favorite things in the world. An anthology movie and a Coen Brothers movie. Sort of all in this Western period, where it was initially going to be... I remember hearing forever ago when Franco was doing his awards run for the Disaster Artist, he was talking about this mini-series thing he'd been doing with the Coen Brothers. And then it just randomly dropped, like, a few months ago that they had condensed this down to a 2-hour and 15-minute movie as opposed to a mini-series, and that it was going to be released around this time of year. And it sort of just came from out of nowhere, because up until then, there was, like, no word on it. Like, they had shot it, and then it seemed like it just kind of disappeared, and nobody was talking about it. And then just, bam, it's a movie now, and it's going to be this year. But there was still plenty of time to get, like, super hyped for it also. And if there's one thing that was maybe a bit immediately you would think maybe this isn't something that you would notice, right away, but I guess there's something about their style or the way their movies look or something. But yeah, if there's something that might seem a bit off to you visually, I remember reading that this is the first movie that the Coens shot on digital, and you can kind of like, it does not exactly have like that exact sort of, not that all their movies have the exact same look, but you get what I mean. It's weirdly clean looking for the type of movie it is, and seeing their previous movies and all that. And there's there's some really sort of obvious like CGI in there that may not have been as obvious otherwise, but this sort of weirdly stands out in a Coen Brothers movie with this setting, but it's in there. But even so, when it starts off, this was a movie that I kind of, I don't want to say it didn't live up to its potential or anything, but I do think people are going to be really thrown off that this isn't the movie that the first segment might make you think it is, because obviously there's a whole bunch of different Coen Brothers types. There's the really absurd, Coen Brothers. There's the over the top comedy Coen Brothers. There's the really really bleak Coen Brothers. Sometimes they find ways to mesh. Like I think the thing I love most about Barton Fink is it's like all these at once. But they really tend to spread that out and sometimes mix and match in their movies and with the tone. And obviously with an anthology movie, we're going to kind of get all that too, but maybe in a bit of a different way than something like Barton Fink offers. So when we start off, we have it's short lived because the first segment's only about 15 minutes or so out of a movie this length. But regardless, it's probably going to be one of my favorite performances of the year, which is Tim Blake Nelson as the title character, who is this. He's sort of an outlaw of sorts. He's got a wanted poster, but he definitely claims that he's not anything like that. And he's talking directly to the camera, and he's in a musical, basically. Like, it's almost like he's trapped in a musical and hardly even realizes it. And then he goes into town and just very unexpectedly fucks shit up in this very gleeful, musical way. And it's, like, so incredibly high energy and hilarious and all this. And there's something so upbeat but kind of dark about it at the same time. There's like a darkness at its center, but it's surrounded by this really, upbeat way about it. It's almost like he rode right in on... Like, this is a character that's supposed to be in Three Amigos with Steve Martin and Chevy Chase and Martin Short. And just somehow wandered into a Coen Brothers movie instead. And it's... Like I said, it's really over the top and, like, really damn absurd. And then it's so... The rest of the movie just sort of... the second story sort of kind of stays there a little bit. A little bit of it remains with the story with James Franco and Stephen Root. We have Stephen Root playing probably his best Coen Brothers character to date. Once again, most of these people are working with short screen times too because of the format, but still... There's... Where this story goes between the two of them... After the two of them, the story does keep going, but between the two of them alone... It still feels like the tone from Buster Scruggs is still lingering, but it's like the movie does progressively get a little darker, with occasional points like the Tom Waits story sort of brings it out of bleakness a little bit, only for it to go right back into it. But that's the thing, though, is that when you think the bleak Coen Brothers, you think like the ending of No Country for Old... or the entirety of No Country for Old Men, really, or like the ending of A Serious Man... or something like that. The ending of True Grit, even. The Coen Brothers go really, really damn bleak if they really want to. But I don't... It's weird. When you look at the Buster Scruggs story, it's like, I don't know if they've ever been more over-the-top and more absurd. But then there's other portions of the movie, like the third story with Liam Neeson. Or really just the whole message of the last story, which pretty much culminates the whole movie in general. And it's like, they've never been more bleak. It's like them at their most extreme on both sides of the spectrum. Which is kind of insane to think about. Especially with how far they've already gone in both of those directions. But the thing also is that, once again, it is very well shot. Because we've got I mean, it's like the Tom Waits story alone, where it just really, really basks in the landscapes, reminds you a lot of what Deakins did with True Grit. Um, but the thing here is that they've also got some more downplayed versions of it. Or, like, for instance, the Liam Neeson story, like, just has that constant bleakness that sort of goes with it. But then you've got um, the Buster Scruggs one has a really great shot where it sort of pans around the room as he's walking, and the entire room behind him is still, just because they've just witnessed what he did. And these characters in the background kind of slowly start moving again as it comes full circle. So it has a lot of fun with stuff like that, and at the end also, one other thing that's like really tone setting, but you just kind of watch the background sometimes, like almost the entire last segment is set in a stagecoach, and it's getting like darker and darker as it goes. Like it's going from like evening to night to whatever the hell. And you can sort of see as the story kind of the dialogue starts to get a bit bleaker as it goes. The more the night kind of starts to take over behind them in the background, and the scene gets darker and darker as far as lighting goes. So stuff like that is really well done also. But the thing here is it also has a way of taking those Coen Brothers trademarks, like making taking like the smallest things and making something big out of them. Like I said, even these little appearances, like you think of little details like the bear guy in True Grit, which is like that would only be in a Coen Brothers movie, but you've got like these little casting choices for these very small parts, like Clancy Brown has a small part in the first story, or Ralph Ineson has a small part in the second story, and it's almost like they intentionally went out and found like the best voices in like show business to put in these tiny little parts that are really memorable, with actors with recognizable faces that just sort of add these little touches to these characters that are otherwise pretty throwaway. So there's always sort of something there to appreciate, regardless of how big or small it is, which, like I said, it's just their trademark at this point. And I was talking about, like Stephen Root, for instance, also has like maybe 30 seconds to a minute in the movie. And he's probably one of the most memorable characters in it, but especially for one particular moment. But then there's also, I can see where like it might fall short for some people, and I can sort of feeling it falling short for me. But like I said before, Coen Brothers movies are usually movies that I kind of watch over and over again to really sort of get their feel. I don't know that you can fully get the feel of a Coen Brothers movie the first go around. But at the start, just seeing it this first time right off, the Zoe Kazan story, which I imagine might, be a high point for a lot of people since it's the longest one, so it's going to be the most sort of like, it's going to feel a lot more fleshed out than the stories that are like 15 minutes long or whatever. And she is, at first I wasn't sure how to make of her performance, because I was like, I could totally see Zoe Kazan being like, a nice fleshed out Coen Brothers character, but at the same time, I wasn't, I don't know that I was completely on board at the start, but then as it kept going, I kind of warmed up to her and her character. But the thing is despite the fact that it's much longer and the characters get to be a bit more fleshed out, it does still feel like the characters in the story actually have a destination, like, for sure. But the trouble is that to get to that destination on their way there, it does feel very directionless. And it is just sort of like, it's not really particularly going much of anywhere, despite the fact that we have a known destination. And the characters I don't think were quite interesting enough, especially by Coen Brothers standards. They sort of just felt like it sort of felt like watching Meek's Cut Off again, the Kelly Reichardt movie, which I'm not a fan of. But I wish, it was good enough to where I wished I could have been more attached to the characters and more into, say, that particular portion, but, I do think its length kind of did it in a little bit in this sort of... There are definitely other stories here that could have used that runtime probably more effectively, though it does eventually get to a conclusion that pays off. In a particular... Well, it starts off in an explosive way, but then ultimately just in this gut punch way, but regardless of any way it hits, it does hit. But I do think things could have been spread out a little bit, like... the Franco story, the second story, does feel like there's a lot missing in it. Like when they had it as a miniseries and then they cut it down, it's like this one seems like it got the most cutting involved. And he's sort of like the way he kind of goes from one place to the other, and it's sort of like there almost could have been like a Twilight Zone vibe to the Franco story if it had been given more time to do what it was doing. But in the meantime, it just sort of wants to hit a few particular points, but then with like no extra room hits those points and ends just like that. So I feel like that probably could have benefited from a bit more. And then you've got the Liam Neeson story, which is it's Liam Neeson and the kid that played Dudley Dursley in the Harry Potter movies as his sort of... He's going around and he's this entertainer that gets people to pay to listen to him tell poetry despite the fact that he has no arms or legs and this is just what he does. And they're like this nice act or whatever, and they go from place to place as the crowds get into this. But the thing is that it gets you start to wonder for a while where it's going, but there is something sort of dark and bleak feeling about it immediately just by how it feels, even if nothing dark or bleak is happening yet. But then it goes in a direction where it is like, I mean, you want to commend it because it's like the Coen brothers going bleaker than probably they've ever gone. But at the same time, it does just sort of feel like it's wallowing in it. Like it's just sort of wallowing in that solemn place and then barely has a payoff. Like, it's one of those things where, if there's one thing that the Coen brothers tend to get criticized for, particularly with stuff like No Country for Old Men or The End of a Serious Man was pretty much the whole point. This whole thing personified was that sometimes they tend to be called pointless. Or like Burn After Reading. Like, Burn After Reading is pointless, but that's what makes it so funny. But here, it does just sort of feel like let's just go as dark as we can go with pretty much no other thing to say about it. So, yeah. And I mean, it does, like, the story does have, like, you know, a point to where it goes in a certain direction and it makes sense as a story. But it just wasn't really worth wallowing in that much bleakness. I don't really know. But that is the thing, though, particularly when you see, like, sort of the Tom Waits story, without saying too much, really plays with this, too. When you look at that bleakness, or you look at the Buster Scruggs story, or whatever, it's like, any of their movies, but in this movie in particular, you never really know, in regards to the absurd, or the comedy, or the over-the-top quality, or just the bleakness of that Liam Neeson story. When the story starts, you never know which direction they're going to go or which one it's going to end up in. But the only issue I would say I have with the movie is the fact that 9 times out of 10 in this movie, they go the bleak direction. But given what the general theme of it is, that makes sense. But like I said, I think it's just probably jarring that the Buster Scruggs story is the tone that it is, and then where we end up as it goes on, where it gets seemingly progressively bleaker as it goes, more or less. If it were to actually get as bleaker as it goes, the Liam Neeson story would have been last. But even so, like I said, it does sort of have a nice tie-up where the last story sort of like brings it all around and sort of basically says without saying this was the theme of all the other stories. But yeah, even though that energy that it has at the start does seem to die down more and more, it does feel like it's like I said, if it was anybody but the Coen brothers, I would say it's, you know, too much. But knowing their style, where they could go one way or the other, and the fact that even when they go bleak, it almost seems like they're having some really like twisted fun with it. It's like it's almost like you want to get mad at the Liam Neeson story for being what it is, but then you just think the only direction you can imagine the Coen brothers going for is the reaction that much bleakness would get out of somebody, where it's just like that reaction where we say, good God, is that the bleakest thing they've ever done? It's almost like you get a sense that they get a kick out of that being the reaction, which is kind of contagious if you're as much a fan of them as I and millions of other people are. So yeah, so it wasn't quite... I didn't love it as much as I was hoping to, and I didn't love it as much as I thought this first segment made me think I was going to, but it's hard to hold that against it in any way. So, So that's pretty much where I stand with that. Once it's another one where I would like to see it again and figure out where I stand after that. But before I lose my voice, let's go on quickly to The Girl in the Spider's Web. Uh, it's okay. So the thing here is that obviously we had the Millennium trilogy of movies. There were obviously like more books, and they had to spread out through the authors because the original author died of a heart attack unexpectedly, despite the fact that he had all the notes for all the other books he was going to do. I think he wanted to do like 10 books or something in this series. But then because of his family, things got all jumbled, and then some other author wrote this book, and they decided they were going to make this book a sequel, a somewhat indirect sequel to Fincher's movie, because Fincher didn't make The Girl Who Played with Fire, The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, like everybody wanted him to. So right away, you kind of wonder, like, what is the objective here? Is it just that... Because they got Fede Alvarez to direct it, who did Don't Breathe and the Evil Dead remake, who's really got his own visual flair, so that's a start, but even so... And you do realize they're kind of trying to capture the Fincher feel and kind of keep it in that universe where we have this similar opening title sequence. Similar visually, but the viscera of it's kind of gone, and so the effect of it's kind of gone too. But to his credit, it doesn't seem like he's trying to imitate Fincher, which would have been the easy way out. But even so, we do start off with a plot here that, or a storyline here that seems like it would have been the more interesting movie, where we have Liza Salander is now working as this like avenging angel, and if you don't get that vibe, they just show you with this blatant visual of her standing in front of this sculpture that gives her giant black wings, as she avenges this woman who's getting beat up by her husband and all that, and she blackmails him like we've seen her do and all that. And it basically sets up that this is what she does now. And it's like, if this was like the movie, was her doing this to random dudes just in succession, I think, honestly, that could be its own movie. It really could. But, no. Because we have to bring in... well, obviously, we have to deal with the whole she's a hacker thing. That's gotta be part of her character in some way. So how can we effectively maybe put both of these things together? Well, we'll just kind of abandon that first idea, and now she's got to stop nuclear weapons or some shit. It's basically like the Fast and the Furious movies, where it started off with, like, she blackmails, she gets her revenge and all that, she's a rape survivor and all that, and then they have to solve the family mystery and all that, the missing girl and all that, and then it gets a bit more complicated as the movies go and the stories go. Like, her own family gets involved in all that, but overall, it's this very grounded story. And now suddenly she's stopping, like, nuclear war. So she's going to be on that submarine with the Fast and Furious cast anytime now, we know. And, of course, she's now been... Noomi Rapace obviously made the role, and then Rooney Mara took over just as well. So now we have Claire Foy taking over. And there was, like, a lot of people, like, a lot of big names thrown out, like Scarlett Johansson and Natalie Portman, a number of names thrown around for this part, because it was this, obviously, like, if you're an actress, this will be one of those parts that you, like, desperately want. And Claire Foy seemed like kind of an odd direction to go, but still, you could buy it. And it does seem like... I don't know if the writing is the problem, or if she's just... Because she doesn't feel near as lived in the role as Noomi Rapace or Rooney Mara did. Because there's when you see Noomi Rapace for the very first time in the role, or you see, really especially Rooney Mara, the first time we see her, I love the way Fincher, built up to her. We only saw, really quick shots of her as she was making her way up to the office, which was a great introduction to her. It kind of gave her this intimidating factor, and he tried to shield her face in that scene as much as he could before she finally turned. And there's just something so impactful about the first time we see her, whether it be the first time we saw Rapace or Mara. Foy doesn't really have that, immediate presence that you need. Where you just see her and just instantly you feel something about this character. I mean, that first shot is nice, you know, with the wings and all that, but there's just something that's really not hitting in that way that the other two actresses were able to pull off. Um, Not to mention when you saddle her with this really tired story, which has got a weird amount of Mercury Rising in it, while it's also basically trying to be a Bourne movie after a while. Where, I mean, it's got an interesting enough supporting cast too, but nobody really has to do anything interesting here. Not even her in this role. The Blomkvist role is just almost immediately. I don't even remember who the hell that guy is playing him, but a lot of it feels very superfluous. But because we've got, you know, Lakeith Stanfield, and it's like, holy shit, he's in this, which I didn't know until the opening credits. But he's just, you know, the agent dude that's looking, for some reason, basically running this, like, seemingly personal mission. Just like a one-man mission to find her, despite the fact that he's in this whole room and he blows the alarm and all that. It's like all he seems to do is annoy people, when it's like, well, you know, nuclear codes and shit are on the loose now, but okay, I'll do this on my own. And we've got the person who created this thing is Stephen Merchant, who's a very interesting casting choice. Maybe not as interesting as his casting in Logan, but still, it's interesting where his career's going. And so it's like, alright, I kind of buy this, I can get on board with this. Barely in the damn movie, it doesn't matter. So eventually that leads to... Okay, so I was talking about the story of, it's like, oh, Elizabeth Salander, you think hacking, or, you know, solving mysteries or whatever, now it's nuclear weapons. Well, what else could make this movie really dumb? I'll give you a hint. I just compared it to Mercury Rising. Yes, of course she's saddled with the kid. But not only is she saddled with a kid, oh no, we've got to take it an annoying step further. It's like, it's not an annoying enough trope that she's, you know, saddled with the kid that she's got to protect and all that. No, it just had to fucking be the genius kid while they were at it. So it's like they were intentionally trying to take everything in the most wrong direction they could. So, yeah, and then that's what this is. And it pretty much goes in all those directions you'd expect, especially with the Bourne comparisons. Yes, she's going to be chased around, and she's going to escape by taking off one piece of clothing and putting on somebody sleeping that really doesn't look like her at all, but it'll work anyway. It's Jason Bourne's red bag all over again, only not near as effective, and at this point, extremely tired. The Bourne identity is, 15 years old, and we're still trying to be it. Okay. But you're already in your own franchise. You're just... But, whatever. But yeah, obviously with that, there is a lot of, like, reused techniques. At some point, Lakeith Stanfield finds himself victim to the Silence of the Lambs fake-out. There's also some questionable techniques here, too, like how they find excitement. Like, there's a point in time when she's been injected with something and she's trying to drive at the same time. So it's like, oh, there should be all kinds of excitement here, but she's got to get here on time, but she's also injected with this stuff, and this car's all over the place in the snow and all that. And it's like, how do we ramp up the excitement? She almost runs into something because she's not looking at the fucking road. And not because she's been injected with something, because she gets distracted by something. And it's like, oh yeah, way to ramp up the excitement. That's great. This is like really on par with the chasing the Stellan Skarsgård scene in Fincher's movie. Yeah, definitely up there. So, yeah, and that's the thing, too, is it's really one of those things where you just look at it from, like, the whole perspective, and really the most jarring thing is it's like, what is the benefit of this movie's existence? Not only just, this is what it looks like, but going through the trouble of making it in general, because obviously we had the original trilogy, and then we have Fincher's movie, and then everybody's praying for Fincher to make The Girl Who Played with Fire, and then it doesn't happen. And it's like somebody wanted to follow up on Fincher's movie bad enough that they were like, well, let's do the semi-reboot thing. Let's completely recast everybody. Let's get another director who has a couple of good credits to his name. But it's like, where is this coming from? Because it can't be a financial thing. Because I don't think the Girls Dragon Tattoo movies are going to break the box office. I can't remember exactly how well Fincher's movie did, but particularly here. But still, it's like, is this really what you're going to go to if you want to make some big studio let's make money movie? I wouldn't think that's the case, especially going with an actress that's mainly known for TV. I mean, I know that's where a lot of audiences are these days, but it's like, it just seems like a very odd choice all around. So it's like, is it coming from like a sort of fandom where it's like the people who made this wanted another one because we wanted to follow up on what Fincher did, and because you love the series, you love the character, you need that character on the screen. Okay, then why did you make this fucking movie if you're such a fan? If you so desperately needed to see this character again or a continuation of this again, why would this be the movie you would make? Where is the benefit in this movie existing? Like, who is this for? And why? Like, where is the passion in it at all, if that's where you're coming from? So I don't know. It's an odd thing, this movie's existence. I don't really know what to make of it. So that's all I can really say about it. Like, that's all it leaves me with. So we'll just go on to the last movie. Speaking of, The Grinch. We're now doing an animated version of The Grinch. And so it's one thing that, like, obviously when you look at what Dr. Seuss movies have become, we start with, I mean, obviously we had, the old, animated movies, but talking more recently, like, starting more recently being the past 18 years. So we'll start with Ron Howard's Grinch movie. Then, of course, we had The Cat in the Hat with Mike Myers. We had Horton Hears a Who with Jim Carrey again. We had The Lorax. And it's like, at some point, Dr. Seuss's name in the movie world became synonymous with pointless cash grab and soulless cash grab, which is really unfortunate, but that seems to be the way things are. So, with that mindset, who better to make another version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas but Illumination? The people who brought us the Minions and Won't Let Them Die. So it's like, this is like... And also, we've got, Secret Life of Pets now. Because the thing is Illumination's logo has been the Minions running around, like, screaming the name. But it's like, this is a company that just holds on to its popular characters for such dear life that they have now added Kevin Hart's bunny to the opening logo along with the Minions. It's the two of them working together now. So it's like, this is how much creativity this company has, that it has two characters, really, if you count the Minions as one, and it's like, this is what we're just gonna create one thing and then hold the fuck on to it, while it just does its thing for us. And that's the very first thing we see, to give us an idea of where their hearts must be, with this Grinch adaptation. So, we start off with narration. Okay, Benedict Cumberbatch is the Grinch. Not bad. It does feel less like he suits the character and more, hey, that dude's popular, we can put his name on the poster. But he's, he does... I can't believe I'm mentioning The Desolation of Smog again in this damn video. But he has shown that he can, do some really cool things with his voice. So, yeah, I'm fine with that and all things. But this also, obviously, the Grinch is also known for its narrator. So, you think, talking about choosing people for their popularity, not necessarily if they suit the job or not. So it's like, okay, let's look at our narrators. The original animated movie got Boris Karloff. Ron Howard nabbed Anthony Hopkins. It's like, these are like great storyteller voices. Okay, so who are we going to get for this one? How about Pharrell? Okay, I get doing the music for the movie, I guess. But did you really need Pharrell to put on another hat, as he's so often known for? But also in the figurative sense, that is just, I don't know what the fuck that's about, but whatever. But so apart from that the movie is narrated by Pharrell. And they've taken some, like, I believe Anthony Hopkins was, like, actually reading from the book, and obviously Karloff, but they seem to have taken some liberties here, where, like, half of it's him reading from the book, and half of it is just shit they made up. to fit their stupid little plot or whatever. So, I don't know. But the thing here, though, is apart from something as bizarre as Pharrell's the narrator, this movie is probably exactly what the hell you think it is. Like, if you were to say the company that made Despicable Me and The Secret Life of Pets, and, like, they did Sing, too, didn't they? If you were to say they made a new animated version of The Grinch, I guarantee you the exact visual you get is exactly what's on the damn screen of this movie. And there is, like, no surprises whatsoever. It is so, like, just in that alone, you can only just imagine how, like, soulless it is. I mean, it's got a little bit of an energy. It's trying a little bit to be, like, colorful and shit, but it's, like, it's to a point now where, like, a lot of these just look the damn same. And it's like, I mean, yeah, it's like, you know, a snowy landscape, and yeah, they kind of look like Who's, but it just all, just, yeah, there's just nothing that's really particularly wondrous about this Whoville at all. And the most we get is, like, because obviously, you know, with Ron Howard's movie, you get a glimpse of it, like seeing Christmas through the eyes of, like, Cindy Lou, where we see the way that, you know, she views Christmas and how she sees how they look at it and all that. So it's like, okay, if we could get that point of view in Ron Howard's movie, whether that movie was maybe misguided at times, I wonder how this Cindy Lou is going to view what's going on here. Well, for the love of shit. This Cindy Lou is... Okay, because here's the thing, is when you have the movies like this, from the people that made, like, Minions and Secret Life of Pets and all that, you know their goal is be as loud and frantic as possible so that we don't lose their attention at all whatsoever. So, of course, Cindy Lou's objective in this movie is not necessarily, you know, find out what Christmas really means or, you know, do something... I mean, her objective is, you know... find Santa, get Santa a letter, or find him personally and meet him so I can tell him to help my single mom out. That's supposedly her objective. Her real objective is make as much fucking noise as possible and be as annoying as possible. This scene alone where she goes to deliver a letter to Santa is like, she's like bouncing around on rooftops, and it's like the fact that they put a damn car chase in the Lorax. It's shot in a similar way. And it's like just the most mundane bullshit like that is really, really trying to convince you this movie's super duper exciting, but the only people that really can... If, maybe. I don't, you know, assume to have the mind of a child, but I'd be surprised if even children are falling for this, that this is supposed to give them the idea that something exciting is happening, but whatever. Because Cindy Lou is now very annoying and very bouncy, and it's... Yeah, just another annoying child character in these movies. Nothing particularly... Not a particular perspective on the story at all, because fuck that. So, the thing now is, how do we drag out the runtime? Well, we saw all the stuff Ron Howard came up with, the holiday cheermeister thing and all that. So it's like, okay, what's this movie gonna do then? Because it is weird to me that this is an animated Grinch movie, and instead of comparing it to the other animated Grinch movie, we're immediately comparing it to Ron Howard's movie because it's significantly more comparable. Isn't that weird? That shouldn't be what we're immediately comparing it to. But the fact that it's a lot closer to that is... You can sort of see where the issues are. So the question now is, how exactly are they going to, you know, pad out the runtime? Because obviously the whole movie can't be him stealing Christmas, because they did that once, and the movie's only about 45 minutes. But no, we need theatrical releases and merchandise and shit. So how are we going to do this? Well, with not a whole lot, and you would think that'd be a good thing, that they're not trying to pad it too much, but still, there's still stuff in here that doesn't need to be, to get to him stealing Christmas. Because we've got, he's got, like, a neighbor, voiced by Kenan Thompson, who he's basically, like, keeps having runs with the guy that's, like, really into Christmas. He's basically, like, I guess, somewhere between Molly Shannon and Kristen Baranski and Ron Howard's movie. I don't know. At least this one didn't give The Grinch a love story. You can give it that much credit, but even so, But they also sort of... There's one thing that they kind of promised to do and they didn't, which once again is a good thing, but also confusing. The poster for the movie is like a little young Grinch with a little scarf, and the tagline is, "He gets meaner." And it gives you the idea, because that was another thing that Ron Howard's movie really stretched out, was getting his whole backstory of why he hated Christmas and everything. And this movie does the same, but it's barely there. It's in like these really half-assed flashbacks that like we barely see. And the marketing makes it seem like we're gonna start off that way and he's gonna... But that would have sucked. I'm glad they didn't do that, but still... it's just an odd thing to even have in there at all. Like, if you're going to explore it, I guess try to explore it, as boring as that would be and as unnecessary as that is. But it's like, they just needed to pad the runtime to get to him stealing Christmas, and that's all they could do. It was basically the same shit the Ron Howard movie did, just really, really, really cut down. So, it's... Yeah, every now and then there's something, like, kind of funny, like the giant chalkboard plan, where he builds up what he's gonna do, and he turns the board over, and it's literally just the word Santa on this big ass board. And every now and then there's like this clever visual, like when he's standing outside the Kenan Thompson character's house, and he's illustrating what he's gonna do to Max, and like he's saying, like, I'm gonna, be on the roof or whatever, and his hands match up to his house in the background, like, as a visual of what his plan is. I don't know how well I explained that, but it looks nice. But overall, though, there's still just something here, like, another thing you can tell about a movie that's, like, really soulless, especially about its jokes, is there's gonna be the one joke that they will not fucking let go, and it's gonna be all over the advertising. In this particular case, it's the Screaming Goat. Which is a shame, because the first time they used the Screaming Goat is actually kind of funny, and actually causes conflict. It's not just there to be a fucking noise. Because it's the whole... He's got, like, a whole, like, hundreds of reindeer he can use, and then the Screaming Goat scares them all away, except for one fat-ass one that he's stuck with. And it's like, that's kind of funny, but then, obviously, it's the last moment of the movie. For no fucking reason, because they knew it was going to be the hit joke. It's the Screaming Deer's just at the end. And he screams again. Fucking hilarious. But, so yeah, and it's really just... It also very much feels like, similar territory, like already explored territory with Illumination, because it's like... Despicable Me was all about, the focus being the villain and how he's actually got a heart or whatever, and it's like, that's literally what the fucking Grinch is, so it's like, of course they did it. But it's like, were they going to add anything to this, though? Of course not. And does anybody expect them to? No. And that's the problem. Is that people don't even expect anything from it. They expect exactly what's here, which will probably make it easy to forgive, because it's not like they did anything to actively make it, like, much worse. I mean, but still, like, what does that even leave you with? I don't know, just pop culture references, pop songs, everything. Pop culture references. There's the one moment when, they talk about what they're gonna do, and then, like, a kid says science, like Jesse Pinkman in Breaking Bad. So it's like, alright, is there much of a crossover between these two? I don't know. I mean, the Breaking Bad joke in Zootopia is really lame, too, because it's like, hey, look, here's this blatantly obvious reference to that show, but, oh, isn't it weird, because this show is, like, way too mature for the audience for Zootopia. And that's... And then this is just... that. At least this one... The reference in The Grinch is actually... The Breaking Bad reference in The Grinch is actually significantly more subtle than the one in Zootopia. But people, like the one in Zootopia for some reason, because, hey, I recognize that, or whatever. But, yeah. So, yeah, but really, all in all, though, I just kind of feel nothing towards this. Like, it might seem like I'm a bit amped up about it, but I'm really not. There's nothing here that's even worth getting that bent out of shape about. Which, like I said, may add to the problem. The whole, it's completely and totally lazy and pointless, but because it's not, like, completely overly bad, we just kind of dismiss it and say, whatever, you're not hurting anybody. Then they just keep fucking doing it. And it's like, as long as we're not hurting anybody, here's more lazy shit. But yeah, so but it doesn't matter. They're gonna always there's always going to be shit like this. There's always been shit like this, and there always will be, unfortunately. So the only notable thing about it really is that one of the directors is Scott Mosier, and if you're a Kevin Smith fan, yes, that's Scott Mosier. The dude that produces all of Kevin Smith's movies, and he's in them. He's the that's beautiful man guy in Clerks and all that. He's got cameos in like all the movies. He also did work on. I can't remember if he was a director or a writer or what, but he also that Turkey movie with Woody Harrelson, Freebirds. He also worked on that one too. So I don't know if that's just his thing now. Like he's going back and forth between Kevin Smith and lazy children's movies. This is bizarre. I don't know, but like I said, easily the most interesting thing about it. So there that is. So I think we finally finished here. Next week, we're just going to narrowly escape the Black Friday thing because the movies come out on Wednesday, thank Christ. It's going to be, Creed 2 and Wreck-It Ralph and maybe other things. There's going to be a nice versus this weekend. I did one more with my brother after the past one. More of the blunt stuff, and yeah. And then obviously we're getting more into the awards movies and all that stuff, so all of that, pretty much until the end of the year. So until all that stuff, that's it.